Hey everybody. Um, this is not exactly how I wanted to record this, but it's the only way I seem to be able to make it work tonight. So, what I'm going to do is go through my notes with you. Typically I would be putting my notes on the board and kind of talking through them as I write them, but unfortunately my iPad's not cooperating in Teams tonight, so I'm just going to have to use the actual note pages. So I hope that this is easy enough to follow. And I'm going to just make individual videos for each of the learning objectives so that this won't be forever long. So there will be several videos in a row, and I'll just label them by the learning objectives. All right, let's get started. I'm going to turn my camera off so I can save some bandwidth here. And I'm going to share my screen. So this is chapter 17. And I'm trying to see if I can get rid of this box. Hide the bar. There we go. Okay, so this is chapter 17, and it's about um, integrated marketing communication. And I will tell you what that is in just a second. But the first learning objective is about identifying the components of the communication process. So marketers have to communicate the value of the product. We call that the value proposition, and they have to be able to communicate the value proposition to the target market. So they need a communication strategy. And what we're talking about here is the P for promotion, right? In the 4 Ps. So historically, the way marketing has communicated this value to their market, to the target market, is through like TV stations like ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox. And TV was used to be the predominant way that marketers communicated. But now we have, it's not just those main news type stations. Now we have, specialty stations like ESPN, USA, CNN, MTV, Netflix, Hulu, Amazon. You got video on demand, you got internet, you got social sites. So the landscape has changed a lot in the last few years, and it's really opened up a lot of new opportunities for promoting the value proposition of a product or a service to the target market. So now the challenge with all of that becomes, how do we make sure that when we're communicating across all these multiple types of channels, how do we make sure that our message is consistent? And so you can see here the goal of this idea of integrating the marketing communication. The goal is to make sure that the message is clear, that it's consistent across all the channels. And we kind of talked about the need for consistency last week when we talked about the omni-channel marketing and wanting to make sure that the consumer has a consistent experience no matter how they touch the company and its products. So the same kind of idea is playing out here with integrated marketing communication. So we want clarity, consistency, and we also want to maximize the impact of the communication that we're sending to the target market. So all of a company's product marketing and promotional activities need to project a consistent, unified image to the marketplace. So when we think about all these ways or the disciplines, the ways that we communicate, we don't really want to think about them separately anymore. We want to think about them as a unified opportunities for reaching our customer. So we don't think about advertising by itself or personal selling by itself or sales promotion by itself or public relations by itself or direct marketing by itself or social media by itself. We have to think about them as a group and a way to utilize different channels to consistently send our message. So every one of these offers a different way to connect with the target market, but we have to make sure that we have kind of a unified strategy across all of them. So when we think about integrated marketing communication, I'm going to call it IMC because that's a mouthful. Whenever we think about them, we think about 3 different pieces of the strategy. One, we think about the consumer themselves. How are the consumers going to receive the communication? Which of these, ways are we going to communicate with the consumer? And how is the delivery of the message going to affect the form of the message and the content of the message? So, sending something in one way here versus a different way may impact what the content, and it may impact the form that the message takes. For example, on TikTok, it might be a short video, but in an advertisement, it might be, something in print, in a print magazine, for example. So even though the form's going to be different and the content's going to be different, we want to make sure that we have a unified communication strategy across those. So we think about the consumer, those are the things we're thinking about. Then when we think about the channel through which the message is going to be communicated, remember, a channel in marketing is kind of like our path to the customer. Um, so how are we going to use all the available channels to reach the customer? Which ones are we going to use? Which ones are we not going to use? And how will we use the ones we decide to use in the strategy? And then the last thing is evaluation, of course, because no matter what kind of strategy you have, the last step is always to evaluate, is it effective, right? So one thing we want to think about is, how complex is it? And is this complexity in the strategy leading to new ways to measure the results of the strategy itself? So we want to make sure that whatever it is that we decide to do is actually reaching the customer in the way that we want to reach the customer and getting results. Is the customer buying as a result of all this communication? So I want to talk just a little bit about what drives the need for this idea of communication strategy. So let's talk a little bit about history. So like I mentioned before, we didn't used to have so many options for communicating with a customer. And most companies use some form of mass advertising. So it was just like one blanket message went out across, to lots of people. But we've moved away from this idea of mass advertising into what we call now niche marketing. So finding a way to really target and specialize those communications. So mass advertising was very fragmented. And this idea of niche marketing is this idea of integrated marketing communication, where the communication is consistent, but it's delivered in very targeted ways to the target market. So what's driven that is that we have popularity of more specialized media. So we can have individual patterns of consumption. We also are able to drive more increased segments based on customer tastes and preferences. We've also moved from a manufacturer-dominated market to a retail-oriented market. And in that retail-oriented market, it's really a customer-controlled market, right? The manufacturer really doesn't dominate what's sold anymore. It's based on what the customer needs. We've gone from, if I make it, they'll buy it kind of idea, to we need to make what the customer needs and wants. And so it has shifted to the customers in control of what gets made and what gets sold. There's also a growing use of data-based marketing versus just a general focus advertising. We use a lot of data now to tell us what's effective, what's not effective. We can tell who's clicking on an ad, where they came from, where they go after they click. So all this data is available to us now. And so we're utilizing that data to make sure that the communication to the customer is effective. We're also using performance-based compensation within organizations. There's greater business accountability, especially in marketing. There's unlimited internet access, so there's a lot more availability for online products. And there's just a bigger focus on marketing activities that create value for the audience, while it increases benefits and decreases cost. So some of the positives associated with integrated marketing communication is it kind of avoids duplication because we have this unified approach. It helps us to take advantage of synergies. It's an easy way to maximize our return on investment in marketing. and it reflects the changing environment that we live in. If you have too many ads out there, it overwhelms the customer and you risk them overlooking things or ignoring things if they're not relevant. If you use a lot of channels, you can effectively create better brand awareness. And it's more cost effective if the customer interacts with the brand across various channels. Because basically it just immerses that customer in communication and it helps them, move through those buying process stages a lot faster. So again, we talked about omni-channel marketing. This idea of integrated marketing communication also helps us create that seamless purchasing experience. It helps us create that loyalty that we're really trying to drive so that we have lifelong customers. All right, so that's kind of a little bit of, how the history has shifted, how this IMC is really making a big difference in the effectiveness of marketing, and how it's also helping to better reach customers in a lower cost, higher benefit type of way. So let's talk about how the communication process actually works. Your book shows this top area here, where it starts with the sender. All communication starts with the sender, and the sender determines what message they want to send. And, if we're talking about communication just between you and I, that's probably a good way to think about this. So when I decide to tell you something, what I want to tell you is just in my brain, right? It's not in your brain at this point. It's just in my brain. And my brain has to turn that thought into a message that I think you will understand. So my brain does what we call encodes the message. It puts it in a format that I believe you can understand. So when I transmit, I tell you this encoded message and I send it to you through some channel. I might speak to you. I might send you a letter. I might text you something. I might post something on your social media account, but I'm going to choose a channel to send my message through. And then you're going to see that and you're going to receive it. And what you're going to do is you're going to see this message and your brain has to turn that message into something that makes sense to your brain. So I encode what's in my brain, send it through a channel, and then you receive it and you decode it. Now, have you ever told somebody something and when you hear what they think you said, it's not what you said at all, or it's not what you thought you were saying, right? So they didn't decode it in the same way that you encoded it. So you sent one message, but they received a different message. If you've ever played that game of telephone, as the word goes around, this one person whispers in the next person's ear, and then that person whispers to the next person the message, and it goes around the circle or down the line. And by the time it gets to the end, it's always a completely different message. And that's an example of how one person tells what they want to communicate, but when the other person hears it, they don't hear it correctly, or they decode it incorrectly. And so the message gets lost, right? So that's why this feedback loop is really important. So if we don't have the receiver send feedback where they say, here's what I think I heard, right? Or here's what I think I read, or here's what I think I saw. If they don't send that back over here to the sender doesn't really have a way of knowing whether they got the correct message, whether they got what you intended to send. So this feedback loop becomes incredibly important. In addition, as if this wasn't difficult enough, I wrote up here noise from the environment. There's also other things that are happening in the person's environment that could impact further how they hear your message, right? How they decode your message. So noise could be anything from real noise, For example, if I go out to eat with my sister, she is deaf in one ear. When she was young, she did something stupid and she jumped out of an airplane, skydiving. And when she was little, she had tubes in her ears. And she didn't know this, but it's not really wise to jump out of an airplane if you've had tubes in your ears because your ear canals are weak. But when she jumped out of the airplane, it busted her eardrum in a horrible way. And after, 5, 6, 7 surgeries on her ear, they just weren't able to repair it. And she is just, deaf in that ear. So if she doesn't have her hearing aid on, she can't hear anything in that ear. So, for example, and even when it's on, the hearing aid is bothered by, extra peripheral noise. So if we go to eat in a restaurant and I sit on the wrong side of her body and I talk to her, she can't hear anything I'm saying to her. And so that's literal noise from the environment that's preventing her from receiving the message that I'm sending. Other types of noise could be things like, maybe the person is tired. Maybe if it's my son and he hasn't eaten, maybe he's hangry. And, that's kind of impeding his ability to hear what I have to say to him. So noise could be anything that interrupts what's this message being transmitted, or anything that might cause that person to not quite decode it quite right. So I have enhanced this little drawing a little bit because I want to kind of reiterate what happens in the feedback. So we have the sender, which in our case is the company, right? The marketing department is sending the message. They decide how to encode it. What words are they going to use, or what pictures are they going to use, or what adjectives or colors, or colors tell us certain things. So they pick how to encode this message, and they also choose the channel to send it through. And then it comes over here to the receiver, who is the customer, and this customer is going to decode this message. And of course, we can have all this noise going on. But I want to talk about this feedback loop. So if you look down here, the feedback loop, the receiver, now he has something in his brain, and he's going to encode it, just like over here. Originally, the sender encoded his message. Well, now the receiver is sending a message back. So the receiver effectively becomes the sender on the feedback loop. He encodes the message, chooses a channel, sends the message through some channel, and then when it's coming back in here to the original sender, who is now the receiver, that sender has to go through this decoding process. So there's opportunities for it to get messed up going this direction, and then there's opportunities for what the receiver heard to get messed up going back through the feedback loop. So if you ever wonder why sometimes you talk to people and you think, did they not even hear what I said? It's because this decoding piece complicates things, right? So the feedback comes along. The receiver encodes it, sends it through a channel. The sender, who's now the receiver, decodes it, and he goes, "Oh yeah, either that was right, the guy got it right, and we're done." Or if he didn't get it right, he says, "Well, oh my goodness, now I have to try again because this isn't right." So if it isn't right, the sender tries again, and we go back around the circle. And the idea is that you just keep going through this loop until the receiver gets the correct message. Now, here's the thing. The marketing firm has to request this feedback. If the receiver doesn't send the feedback on his own, the sender has to request the feedback in some form or fashion. So if you think about, how does marketing do that? How does marketing know if the customer got the right message, right? Well, that's why this whole idea of measuring the results of this IMC strategy is important, because basically that's kind of making sure that this feedback process is working. So I have added some definitions for each piece of this. So the sender is the firm sending the IMC message. We have to clearly identify it to the intended audience. They encode it, what the sender is intending to say. This is the process of converting the sender's ideas into a message. It could be verbal, visual, or both. Then the transmitter is the marketing communication itself. How they're going to highlight the brand, what it offers. The marketing department or agency receives the information and transforms it for its use in its role as a transmitter. Then it goes through the communications channel, which is the medium that carries the message. So this could be print, broadcast, the internet, etc. Whatever medium they choose needs to be appropriate so that it will actually connect with the sender and the receiver. And then the receiver is the person who receives the message, who reads it, hears it, sees it, processes the information that's contained in the message. And the sender hopes that whoever this receiver is part of the intended target market. So this can be another issue, right? You put it into a transmission mode and you send it through a channel and you hope that the person on the other end of the channel is actually in your target market, somebody who's potentially going to be a buyer. Choosing the wrong channel could potentially mean that you don't reach the right target market, that you don't reach the segment you're intending to reach. So choosing that channel is really important. Then decoding is the process where the receiver interprets the sender's message. Noise is anything that interferes, that competes with the message, that causes the message to be unclear. It could be a flaw in the medium if perhaps your video doesn't play all the way through or it gets cut off. Like sometimes you'll see these Facebook posts and the whole video doesn't play. And it'll cause you to go like click a button to see the whole post. Well, that's a flaw in the medium, right? Because you're asking them to do something else to get the whole message. So sometimes that is not very effective. And then you have the feedback loop where the receiver informs the sender whether the message was received and decoded properly. And again, this feedback loop could look like, did they purchase? Did they complain or compliment? Did they redeem a coupon? Did they tweet? Did they post a comment? Did they interact on social media? That feedback loop could take many forms here. So what problems do we have in this communication model? Well, the first problem we have is every person has the potential to decode a message differently. And the sender, the firm, marketing company, has no control over the meaning that a receiver is going to take from the message, right? We're dealing with somebody's brain inside their head here, and they can interpret it however they want to, and we can't control that at all. So as senders, we have to adjust our messages based on whatever medium we're using, but not just the medium, not just the channel, but also the receiver's traits. So we have to think about who we're communicating with. Are we communicating with suppliers, shareholders, customers, the public, segments of these groups? So if we looked at an example, let's say it's flu season and Kroger decides to uh, advertise some things, right? They have something they want to communicate. Well, if it's flu season, then they might, when you go into the store, if you listen to the music or whatever, that's like a private radio station. And you know how sometimes when you're shopping, you'll hear these little ads for things, right? Like, oh, it's flu season, come pick your cold remedies. And they're playing that on their radio station while people are shopping. So if it's flu season, you'll probably hear ads for cold remedies. If it's the sports playoffs, you're going to hear things for chips and dip and wings, or if it's the Super Bowl or something. If it's summertime, you're going to hear ads for sunscreen, right? So they're taking into account who they're communicating with and what value proposition they're trying to push onto the customer at the time. All right, I'm going to stop this video here and I will pick up a second video and we'll talk about the ADA model.